So this is a bit of a strange video for us to shoot, but we've had a few people who've asked to know a little bit more about Danny and myself and about our backgrounds and about the sailing experience that we had before we set off on this trip and what sort of led us to decide to spend 18 months, 2 years cruising. So yeah, here it is.
So I'll kick off, yeah?
Sure.
So obviously I'm Danny, I'm 33 years old and I'm Kiwi born and bred, and I moved to London on my big OE when I was 27 years old and really loved it. Lived in London for 5 years and travelled all around Europe and had a really great time in Europe, but also just in London. But on one of our last trips back to New Zealand, we'd go home about every year to see friends and family or someone would get married. I realised it was time to go home. I was really missing New Zealand and missing the people, so Ash and I started talking about when we would go home. We would make the big move back to New Zealand, and that we didn't want to just do it on a flight. We wanted to have some sort of adventure on the way home.
Yeah.
So
we tossed up the idea of buying a van.
We did, yeah.
And driving, going sort of across Asia, down as far as Malaysia or Singapore, then we fly home from there.
That was the original plan. And then Asher one day in the kitchen said to me, "You know, we could sail home." And I was like, "No, we can't." Only serious sailing people can do that. But he convinced me that we can. And after watching a few different YouTube channels, I realised that we can. But for me, my experience in sailing is very, very limited. So I've obviously done 6,000 miles now and I feel pretty confident on the water, but I'm still learning so much. Back then, I really hadn't hardly anything. I grew up in New Zealand, in Auckland, where a lot of people have sailing boats, so I did go out on boats quite a lot, but I never really knew what was going on. And I just sort of sat and enjoyed the water and enjoyed the sunshine. But it wasn't, I wasn't doing anything helpful. I might pull a rope here or there, and I certainly didn't really understand the physics behind sailing, and I definitely didn't understand the terms. I know anyone who's new to sailing will realise there's a whole new dictionary for sailing. Every word that you know the English word for, there'll be a different word in sailing chat. So a kitchen is a galley, a toilet is a head. Left and right don't exist anymore, you've got port and starboard, blah blah blah. So it was, for me, the whole sailing thing has been a complete steep learning curve, baptism by fire, but I was lucky to have Asher, who has a huge amount of experience in sailing. So you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah, so I am also 33 years old and I grew up in the Bay of Islands, which is in the far north of New Zealand. It's a really nice place to go sailing. My family sailed. My dad is a boat builder and a wooden boat enthusiast. My parents have got a really lovely 28-foot gaff-rigged classic New Zealand sailing boat. So I did a lot of sailing on Cora, on that boat when I was younger. I think I learnt to sail, I don't know exactly how old I was, but Dad would take me down to the Waitangi Dinghy Club and put me in an Optimist and send me off. And I'd go out and sail around the buoys with the other kids. I was probably about maybe 9 or 10. And I helped my dad to build a little sailing dinghy when I was little. Dad helped me, I helped him, and yeah, go for it. It's super buggy here in Panama. I don't know if you can see them all flying around.
They bite you through your clothes.
They are the most determined mosquitoes we've ever encountered. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Carry on.
So I learnt to sail when I was a little boy, and then I kept sailing through high school in dinghies on a lake up north as well. I didn't particularly fall in love with sailing until I was a teenager, really. I didn't enjoy it a huge amount as a little boy because I didn't really understand what was going on. I wasn't a particularly talented sailor, I don't think. I used to get hit on the head with the boom quite a bit. But I really did love being out on the water on the family boat and going on holidays. And so I didn't really sail at all at university. I went to the University of Otago and I studied law and philosophy and politics. I got back into sailing on bigger boats, on keel boats, when I graduated and I moved to Auckland and I got my first real job as a lawyer there. And Auckland's a fantastic place for sailing. There's so many boats and there's so many people that go racing. So every Saturday and Wednesday I'd be out on the water racing on a 45-foot keel boat. And that was where I really started, I think, to learn how to sail on bigger boats and how to race. So I did lots of round the Cairns racing in Auckland. I did a couple of offshore races with that boat. I went up to Fiji and I did the delivery trip back with them. I went up from New Zealand to Noumea on a slightly bigger boat in a race. That was a really good trip. We had quite a bit of tough weather to deal with, so that was a good experience for me. But it was always as crew on other people's boats. And then when we moved to the UK, I really wanted to do the Fastnet Race, which is quite a famous blue water offshore race that happens every 2 years in England. And it goes from the UK out to Fastnet Rock, which is off the southern point of Ireland, and comes back again. It's a bit like the Sydney to Hobart race in the Northern Hemisphere. It's also a similar length, about 600 miles. So I really wanted to do that race, and I found myself a boat that was doing it, and I crewed for them. And did a bunch of races between England and France as well on that boat. So that was my sailing experience before we did this trip. I hadn't done very much skippering aside from when I was in a little dinghy, and I had taken my dad's boat out a few times as well on my own with friends.
And we chartered a boat in Greece.
Oh yeah, we did.
You
we did.
that.
Yeah, we did. We chartered a boat in Greece, which I did the skippering on that. So that was sort of my experience. I had a lot of miles as crew, but not really many as skipper before we bought Bacchus, and so that's probably been the biggest learning curve for me on this trip, is learning how to be a skipper and how to manage the boat and all the different things that need to be looked after and keeping an eye on all those different systems. The actual sailing part, making the boat go forward in the direction that you want using the wind, I've got that bit under control. The big learning curves for me have been managing just all those other systems that need to be thought about, managing the navigation, managing the repairs and maintenance on the boat, making the decisions when they need to be made, all that kind of stuff has been a big learning curve for me.
And just the overall responsibility falls with you for me and the boat and our safety.
Yeah.
And
that can be sometimes it feels like quite a heavy responsibility. Certainly I've gotten more comfortable with that the longer this trip's gone on. I'm so much more relaxed now here in Panama with 6,000 miles under our belt than I was when we first set off from England. So I think a lot of people have asked us how much experience you need before you want to set off and do a trip like this. I think you need at least one person in the group that has a fair idea about sailing and boats and maintenance and how to keep everything working. I think one of the biggest jobs as a cruising sailor is keeping your boat functional. So being able to repair the engine or the plumbing or the electrics, being able to troubleshoot a computer or a chart plotter or something that has decided that it's not going to work anymore. Being practical and being able to solve those problems is really important. I certainly wouldn't recommend anybody to head off on a big offshore trip like ours if you haven't already sailed some long distance trips with somebody else and done some good learning from them. I certainly learnt an awful lot on my trips as crew on other people's boats. Yeah.
I think though, if you're a couple and neither of you have got that sailing experience, it certainly doesn't mean you can't do what we're doing. It just, I think it's a big leap, huge leap to go offshore sailing. So
start small.
Start in someone else's boat and, it's a bug in my hair. Start on someone else's boat and learn as much as you can there first before you go and buy your own boat. And then once you get your boat, start inshore and just get comfortable and put yourself in situations a little bit harder and a little bit more uncomfortable to keep learning. And then eventually you can cross oceans. But there's a huge difference between sailing around the Cairns in a harbour, I think, and then going offshore.
Yeah, it's just a difference in how self-sufficient you need to be.
Yeah.
And actually there's a lot more going on when you're sailing inshore to watch out for. There's usually a lot more traffic. There's a lot more
sailing.
There's a lot more sailing. There's a lot of bits of land that you have to watch out for that you don't hit. So yeah, inshore sailing is a really good place to hone your skills. Certainly, sailing in the English Channel is a lot more stressful than sailing in the Caribbean, for instance.
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
And I think the other thing that a few people have asked us is, are we going to keep going once we get to New Zealand? So the answer to that is not on this trip, not on this boat. This adventure for us has always been a way of getting home, a long, slow, fun way of getting back to New Zealand. And when we get to New Zealand, our plan is to put some roots down and build a house.
So we'll sell the boat to help finance the next stage.
But only a couple of days ago we were already talking about where we're going to pick up our next boat and which places we're going to visit because of the places that we had to miss on this trip because of the coronavirus, and other places that we wanted to see that didn't quite make the shortlist for this trip anyway. So I certainly don't think once we get to New Zealand, that'll be the end of travelling by sailboat to places for us.
No, I think there's lots more places we'd like to visit.
But yeah, this trip will end in New Zealand, and we will start a whole new chapter.
We are sailing Bacchus home.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a little bit about us. Of course, if you've got any questions,
Hit us up.
just, put it in the comments. Let us know.
Yeah.
Hope you're enjoying the channel. Give it a subscribe if you are.
Yeah. Cool. Go and get out of these bugs.